You're listening to Boomers Today with your host, Frank Sampson.
Well, welcome to Boomers Today. I'm your host, Frank Sampson. And of course, each week we bring you important and very useful information on issues facing baby boomers, their parents, and other loved ones. I want to thank everybody for all their support. Our listeners are growing each and every day, and it's because of you. You know, we don't advertise or anything. It's you sharing the podcast and various podcast shows with your friends and family and other loved ones, and we appreciate that. And there's no doubt in my mind that you're doing that because we have great guests on our show that provide a tremendous amount of education, and we're not going to disappoint you today. We have with us Michael Gelfgot, who is the Chief Operating Officer for Activate Brain and Body. His drive to be a different kind of a health club started 20 years ago. Between Gelfgot and his partners, they operated 23 health clubs. Now, Mike and his partners are opening first of its kind, Activate Brain and Body, a cutting-edge brain and fitness think tank, growing into a chain of brain health studios. Combining brain training and physical training, Activate Brain and Body is looking to re-engineer fitness as upstream preventive healthcare. Mike, thank you so much for joining us on Boomers Today. Really appreciate it.
Frank, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I just mentioned that the Activate Brain and Body is looking to re-engineer fitness as upstream preventive healthcare. Maybe you could explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, most of the reasons why we tend to go to the hospital can be minimized simply by choosing to live a particular lifestyle. And so it activates brain and body. We help people basically put together the better lifestyle. We help people put together 5 specific things that relate to not only body health, but also brain health, that we know that if people do what they can to either manage stress or exercise, of course, eat a certain way, we know that those sort of lifestyle factors can be preventative in terms of medical costs and in general visiting the hospital, right? It's interesting, right? Because most of us tend to focus a lot on our careers. We tend to focus a lot on the work that we do, and when it comes time to maybe work fewer hours, or maybe we're thinking about retiring, it seems like the focus then becomes, okay, now that I've worked my whole life and hopefully I have some cash to retire on, now the objective is, okay, gosh, but I don't feel good, and I'm not healthy. I don't sleep well. I have aches and pains, and we tend to spend a lot of our time and our money back in the hospital, right? And so, the idea is, can we live a certain way that can be basically minimized in terms of our visits to the hospital?
Yeah. So we, as you know, we're in the senior care business, the company that I started. We talked about that, and we deal quite often with, on an everyday basis with families and adult children who are the caregivers of a parent or other loved one. And quite often, too often, that caregiver, that adult child or spouse, actually becomes ill and can no longer take care of that loved one. And it seems as though you kind of got that right, that the emphasis is working not only on the seniors, but those adult children as well. Talk to us a little bit about that and kind of your emphasis in that area.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the primary individual I would say that we would do our best work with, Mark is the person that
right, and that's it. Yeah, that's right.
I gotta make sure I keep that straight. But it would be the caregiver, right? It would be the individual that's taking care of their grandma or their mother or their father, and they've seen them decline. Of course, and they're wondering, is this going to be me? Now, Frank, you know statistics probably better than I do. As a caregiver, the odds of someone getting some sort of cognitive decline is very high due to the stress that they go through, right? And so, yeah, I mean, the focus should be, right, the person that's taking care of the parents and the grandparents, and to minimize the odds of any sort of physical and cognitive decline, right? And those are like, when we look at the individuals that really are the ones that are helping these older folks, it's the caregivers, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, reading up on your organization and kind of doing some pretty good things. I read in there something that said, if you put the brain first, the body will follow. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, as it turns out, what's good for the body is also really good. What's good for the brain is also really, really good for the body. And here's what I mean by that. Particularly, I would say 3 specific things. One, it's moderate physical activity. We know, of course, physical activity is wonderful and good for the body, right? But specifically as it relates to brain, here's what's interesting about physical activity. It has to be moderate physical activity. According to Dr. John Rady, he wrote a book called Spark. In his book, he talks about that you want to keep your heart rate between 65 and 75% when you do physical activity, because that is the optimum heart rate range to be in to promote your brain's ability to build new brain cells through the process called neurogenesis. So in other words, you're walking, you're doing physical activity, and as long as it's moderate physical activity, not high intense physical activity, which makes blood go away from the brain, right? It's especially if it's for prolonged period of time. Like, it's okay to get your heart rate up for, whatever, a minute or two or 30, 40 seconds. But the idea is you want, in general, the entire workout to be between 65 and 75%, right? So that's one aspect. The second aspect is this: when it comes to both brain and the body, it's functional training. It's good for the brain, and I'll talk about why here in a minute, but it's really, really good for the body. As it relates to the brain, when your heart rate is up and you're basically promoting your brain's ability to build new brain cells, your brain also produces a very powerful protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is like miracle grow, Frank, for the brain. It helps your brain cells basically bind together. Functional training is good for the brain in a sense that most people aren't very functional. So if I can introduce you to something you're not very good at, in other words, Mark or Frank, if I can put you in a learning environment by doing a functional training workout, not only is it good for the brain, but it's also good for the body, right?
Give us an example of
Yeah, so let me define functional in general versus non-functional. So if you think of a traditional workout that most people tend to go through, it would be this: we join a health club, we get on the treadmill, right, and then we basically go through some machines, right? We do some machine bicep curls, machines, and machines. That's a non-functional workout because it does not move your body in 3 planes of motion. 2, you're locked into a certain range of motion, typically either forwards or backwards or up and down, right? Versus a functional training workout, you're moving your body in free motion, you're not locked into any range of motion, and you are moving your body, so 2 things. You're moving your body in all 3 planes of motion, you're not restricted because your body's basically in free motion. So functional training equates to helping people do daily activities easier. Think of daily activities as picking up laundry baskets, or mowing grass, or tinkering in your house. You're always moving your body. You're squatting, kneeling, bending, pulling, pushing. That's function, right? And because you have to basically think, Frank, while you're moving, it's this dual tasking component of functional training that's really, really good for the brain. right? And I guess you can define dual tasking as three things. It's a cognitive thing, Frank. It's a physical thing, and it's your ability to divide your attention between the two and perform the task at the same time, right? We live our lives in this dual tasking functional training. But what's interesting is most people, they don't exercise in that fashion. It seems like when we exercise, our brain, it seems like, is disconnected from the body. We try not to think about a whole lot, right? We basically go through the motions. And although that basic traditional exercising is good for the heart and it's good for the body, it doesn't do much or enough, I should say, for the brain. I shouldn't say it doesn't much.
I'm going to bring up something that it just always stuck in my head when I first got into this field years ago. And I was doing a radio interview with someone who said you should try to do things that you're not part of your routine. So, for example, when you are brushing your teeth, and if you're right-handed, try brushing your teeth with your left hand. Not so easy, all right? But that really gets the brain to work. If you drive to work and you go a certain way, try going a different way, maybe a way that you haven't done, before. Now, I know that's not physical exercise, but is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, your
that
brain.
type of a thing?
Yeah. So Sanjay Gupta released a book in early 2021 called Keep Sharp. In the book, he talks about something really interesting. He says basically the older we get, we don't really do new things. We don't really associate with new people. And basically what he says is your brain thrives on new things, right? And so if we want to potentially improve the function of the brain, we need to introduce ourselves to new things that we normally don't do, like brushing your teeth with your left hand versus your right hand if you're right hand dominant, right? Mm-hmm. Taking a different route to work. Try not using your GPS and all that at all. That's interesting.
Oh, then it's over for me.
But so yes, you're spot on. That's exactly what he's talking about. That's exactly what the idea is to introduce your brain. Now, what we know now is this, particularly if you're able to do it during working out, right? Where if you're able to do it in that dual tasking fashion, where basically you're thinking and you're moving, where you have to divide your attention between the cognitive and the physical task, that's when some of these brain benefits that we all want to see have a chance to basically improve on, and what I mean is reaction time, processing speed, executive function, potentially even memory, right? When you have to divide your attention between a cognitive and a physical task, right? And once again, introducing yourself to something new, to something different, something you're not really good at.
So if you were talking to a friend of yours calls and says, "Hey, Mike, I know you're in this business and I know you're in the Cincinnati area and doing it there, but I'm in, Dallas, and you don't have an operation here. Any suggestions for me of what I could just even do from home or on the outside? Any suggestions you could give?"
Sure, and let's talk about let's get a little more specific. Let's say this individual doesn't do much for physical activity. We'll talk to that individual, and then we'll talk to somebody who already does some physical activity. Right?
Got it.
So the number one thing we can all do to boost our brain power is move our bodies. So that would be my number one advice to somebody who doesn't actually just start moving. Start walking, doing what you can do to exercise. Remember, exercising, you're already building new brain cells each and every single day. Exercising just promotes your brain's ability to build more brain cells, never mind all the other ripple effects of exercise, right? So that was just someone who doesn't exercise, I would start moving your body, start exercising. Now, once you start getting pretty good at maybe walking for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes at a time, then you can start introducing some brain components to it. So for example, one thing you could do is as you're walking, is to incorporate more of that dual tasking component, is count, say from 100 back by sevens, right? So you would say you would do 100, you would do 93, right? 86, 79 while you're walking. Now I'm sitting here talking to you, Frank, but if I were walking, that exercise, me counting backwards by sevens from 100 while I'm walking, would be a lot more challenging because I have to divide my attention between the cognitive and the physical task. Right?
Great point.
Now that's a pretty basic thing that people can engage in, and there is a pattern. Right? At some point, you can even memorize those numbers. So as soon as it no longer becomes basically novel, you figure it out. You need to evolve. You need to change it to make it a bit more challenging. So someone that doesn't do any physical activity, I would say, no matter where you are, start walking, and then start doing physical activity, and then engage yourself in some brain type of training, whether it's some math stuff or maybe it's talking to a friend while you're walking, right? Those would be basic things that you can do. And I would say, gosh, the other thing I would say to somebody who's just getting started, pay attention to your sleep. Frank, you want to get dumb real quick. You want to burn up a lot of brain cells. Boy, just don't sleep well. Stop sleeping, right? Don't pay attention to or do things throughout the day that basically decreases the quality of your sleep. I want to mention one thing about sleep, and we can move on to the other scenario. Your brain has this called this glymphatic system, which basically helps you detox, right? The brain, like your body has a liver, right? Your brain has this glymphatic system. Here's the deal. The only way to get access to the glymphatic system is if you get into deep sleep. And as you know, there are different layers of sleep, right? And so without getting too technical, start exercising, 2, start engaging your brain by either doing some math problems or just having a conversation with a friend. And 3, the other big lever you can pull to make a big impact on both your body and your brain is get some sleep.
Great advice. So we're going to take a real quick break here, Mike, just to recognize our sponsor. When we come back, I want to learn a little bit more about some research called the Nun Study. I want to share with our listeners about that. So when we come back, we'll talk about that. So do you know anybody who may be concerned about an older driver? Well, Senior Care Authority's Beyond Driving with Dignity program is a facilitated self-assessment program for older drivers. This program has been designed to serve as a vital tool to facilitate older drivers and their families as they make appropriate decisions regarding the future of one's safe driving career. If the individual is a safe driver, an advisor will provide him or her with strategies on how to remain a safe driver as they progress through the aging process. If driving retirement is the appropriate decision, then the individual and their family are offered possible alternatives, resources, and a specific plan to ensure a smooth and successful transition from the driver's seat to the passenger seat. To learn more, you could go to www.beyonddrivingwithdignity.com, or you could call 877-907-8841 to connect with a Senior Care Authority advisor in your area. We're back with Michael Gelfgot, who is the Chief Operating Officer for Activate Brain and Body. So Mike, I know I haven't learned about this, but I know you've done some research, and there's something called the Nun Study. You know what? Before we get to that, let's take one step back. All right. Why don't we share with everybody so they have your information, how they could get in touch with you or your organization. Go ahead. It's commercial time. Go ahead.
Sure. I think the best way to get a hold of us, Frank, would be either one, visit our website, activatebrainandbody.com, or people can shoot me an email directly with any questions at mike@activatebrainbody.info.
Okay.
That will be the best way to get a hold of us.
Perfect. Okay, so let's shift to the Nun Study. Tell us a little bit more about that research.
Yep. Frank, I just want to backtrack just for 1 second. You asked me a really wonderful question, which is, gosh, if I'm not in the Cincinnati area, what can I really do?
Great.
I said 3 things, right? Start exercising, start doing what you can to incorporate the brain, whether it's through math challenges or talking to a friend, right? And 3, start paying attention to sleep. I just want to add one more thing to it. Pick up one of these 2 books, Spark by Dr. John Rady or Keep Sharp by Dr. Sanjay Gupta, because both of these books do a really, really, really good job in helping people better explain and better understand on what they can do to get started if they're not exercising at all. Now, let's talk about the NUN study. Frank, I will say this to you. When we talk to people about brain health that activates, if there was one thing that lights up a light bulb, so to say, in people's heads, it's this particular study. It's so intriguing. Basically, here's the deal. You have 300 plus nuns donated their brains to research. When scientists cut into these nuns' brains, of course, postmortem, they looked to see were these brains, did they have presence of tangles and plaques, which are classic signs of Alzheimer's. And they weren't surprised to find that some of these nuns' brains were filled with tangles and plaques. That was not a surprise. What was a surprise was this: when these nuns were alive, they were going through monthly neuropsychological testing. They were being observed by scientists on a regular basis. When the nuns were alive, they showed 0 signs of any sort of dementia. Not all the nuns, just about 20% of the nuns. And when they cut into these nuns' brains, what they found is these brains were filled with tangles and plaques. Right? Particularly, the study talks about a sister. Her name is Sister Bernadette. That woman was teaching into her 90s. Right? She was sharp as a tack, but her brain was filled with tangles and plaques. And so, of course, how is that possible? How could it be that the brain, it just looks demented, basically, right? But the nuns showed no signs of cognitive decline whatsoever. And the only explanation back then that scientists had, well, it has to be based on how these nuns lived their lives. And so they looked at specifically 5 things, Frank. They looked at, were these nuns moving? Were they exercising? 2, were they stimulating their brains? Were they learning? 3, what were they eating? 4, were they socializing? And 5, what were they doing to manage stress? Right. And so it activates when we looked at the research, we basically took these 5 components. We call them 5 components of brain health. We put them together for an individual to follow. By the way, when I talk about the book Spark and Keep Sharp, both authors, both doctors, they talk about, in one way or another, these different aspects of brain health, sort of say, that we can all do to help us slow down and minimize cognitive decline. The objective and the idea behind the NUN study was this: there's this thing you can build called cognitive reserve, which cognitive reserve, here's a technical term. It's a 30-year-old neuroscience-based concept, Frank, that describes the brain's ability to withstand decline. I was floored. I didn't know, Frank, that you can build this reserve like a bank account, basically, that then you can withdraw as you get older to protect your brain. So based on how we live our lives, right, we can build this reserve that we can then basically rely on as we get older, right, to protect our brains. And when I talk about this, when people come in to learn more about what they can do to basically boost their brain and minimize cognitive decline, when we talk about the NUN study, that's the part where people say, what? How is that even a thing? I didn't realize this was possible.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's great.
It's
great.
Beautiful, right? And so it just gives people so much hope, right? It gives people so much. It makes people happy to know that, gosh, I can do things, right? I can make my brain more resilient, right? I can basically add more years to my life, but I have to make different decisions. I have to pay attention to, of course, to what I'm eating. I have to make sure that I'm sleeping. I got to make sure I'm socializing. I got exercising.
That's great. Tell us other, things like that. You've obviously been in the industry for a while. You've done a lot of research, or you and your partners have. And
Yep.
Anything else that you could share with our listeners that you feel would raise some eyebrows, huh?
Well, it just when I think about this research, what I'm about to say next, it just makes me feel good. It gives me goosebumps. It's so cool. So in I believe it was 1970s, in the state of Ohio, there were 300 plus men and women ages 50 and up. They were basically asked their opinion on aging. What are your thoughts on aging? Something along those lines. And people gave, their feedback. 20 something years later, they went back to check to see what's going on with these individuals. Get this. The individuals that had a positive outlook on aging, Frank, they lived an extra 7+ years than the individuals that had a negative outlook on aging, right? And I just think that's so thought-provoking, right? Like, never mind the exercising or like, never mind the eating, right? Although, we should definitely pay attention to all those things. But if you just have a positive attitude about your current situation, right? And if you're hopeful, right? And odds are, right, if you're positive and you're hopeful, you're going to do something to help yourself. But just having a positive attitude, would help you live longer. I mean, come on. Right?
Yeah, I hear from, people that go, oh, I'm getting old. You hear that all the time. And I always interrupt them and say, you're getting older.
That's right.
You're not getting old. And you could have that type of mindset. We're all getting older. I mean,
that's right.
You and I got older during this conversation. All right. So we're all getting older, but to think you're old and having to give up and all that, I agree with you. Yeah.
And you can imagine, I mean, that's a question that I get all the time. The question is, Mike, I'm 65 or I'm 70, right? Are there things that I can really do? Right. And so the way I look at it, we all of us have two kinds of ages. There's our chronological age, and there's nothing that we can do this year. I just turned 40 on May 9th, right? Just, what is it? Today's the 11th, right? So just a few days ago. And next year I'll be 41, right? I mean, that's how it's going to go. I can't control the chronological age, but I can control, right, my biological age. I can control, because we're all going to decline. It's whether it's a positive or but a negative thing, but it is a fact, right? But the question is, how quickly do we decline? And we can control the rate at which we decline. And of course, what I'm referring to is the biological age.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, listen, I could talk to you all day about this subject matter, but unfortunately, we're kind of running out of time. So maybe we could just any words of wisdom to our listeners. What I'm hearing from you is that it's kind of never late to get started here. So maybe you could provide some wisdom to our listeners.
Yeah, the research is very clear. You're never too old, you're never too young to start building your cognitive reserve. But I think it would be an interesting way to take a look at the function and the purpose of your brain is, I'm going to tell you a quick story, and I think this would be a very I believe in an enlightening way to kind of take a look at the purpose of the brain and the body and how they really work together. Because a lot of us try to separate the two. So, and Dr. Rady talks about in this book, Spark. So there's a sea urchin. Basically, sea urchin's got like 200 something brain cells, right? And the purpose of the sea urchin, this whole purpose in life is to find a place to plant its roots. And then what's interesting is once it finds a place, in other words, it moves, right, to find a place to plant its roots. And then once it finds a place to plant its roots, this sounds interesting. It eats its own brain. So Frank, it becomes basically a plant. It doesn't require movement, so therefore it does not need a brain. Now, Dr. Rady talks about this in light of movement in general and how movement is so significant to the brain. And so once again, if there's one thing that we can all do to do what we can to improve our brain health, it's to move your body. Because when we don't move the body, not only do our muscles atrophy, but so do our brain cells. And the sea urchin, I think, is a good example of that.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Hey, Mike, thank you so much for joining us on Boomers today. It was very enlightening.
Thank you for having me, Frank.
Yeah. And thank you, everybody, for joining us on Boomers today. Please, please be safe. And we'll talk to everybody next week.
You've been listening to Boomers Today with Frank Sampson. To learn more about today's show, visit boomerstodayradio.com and join us next time for another edition of Boomers Today.